Thank you and good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be back here again in Gothenburg to give you a really extensive, I think, overview of what's going on in the entertainment industry. I've titled this presentation From Rubble to Reinvention, Reengineering Entertainment. And that's because I think we're at a point that happens every 15, maybe 20 years, where the entertainment industry has to completely restructure, reinvent itself, and rethink the way it does business and engineers relationships between all the multiple different moving parts of the industry. So it's a really exciting and also, of course, challenging time. We're going to touch on a lot of topics today, and I'm going to try and leave some time at the end for Q&A. There is a QR code on the last slide for anyone who wants to download. You just have to stay till the end of the presentation. So, starting off, what's going on out there in the content business? I've called this 28 months later, drawing on inspiration from great cinema releases. Content trends 2.5 years on from peak TV. Of course, we had peak TV in 2022, and we've been in decline pretty much since then. And what that means is that after a period of not quite, but almost exponential growth in spend on content, from the blue line there, you can see we're more or less flatlining, certainly when you take inflation into account, about 2% growth in content spend throughout the forecast period. You can also see the pink line there is the only one that's growing, so licensing has come back into fashion as spend on original content, so first-run original, flattens. In terms of who's spending, a couple of clear trends here. Basically, the streamers are the ones continuing to grow their content spend, albeit at a reduced rate of growth from what we enjoyed during peak TV. And you can see an important inflection point there in 2028 when streamers globally will be spending more than the legacy broadcast industry put together. In terms of commissioning activity, I talked last year and possibly even the year before about 75% peak TV. And that was a kind of joke to say we're 25% down on the peak of 2022. Wherever you run those numbers, so you run them again for full year 25, still 25% down. So this is the new steady state, as I alluded to in previous presentations. This is the world in which we have to engineer our attitudes for. In terms of sector that is commissioning, and this is first-run content again, you can see the flatlining at zero because this graph is showing change versus a year earlier. Zero means no change. The one that's going down significantly, again, as you can see, is public and commercial broadcast. That, of course, because those players are so important in Europe, is disproportionately felt in Europe. So those very important commissioners reducing first-run commissioning quite significantly. Looking specifically at the streamers, and this is the global six, so the six you'd imagine, HBO, Max, Disney, etc., Netflix, Amazon, Apple. Interesting trends. Every region is down on last year, with the exception of Asia, which probably isn't a surprise. That's still a growth region for the streamers. The interesting one, I think, is North America. So we were seeing wholesale movement to international markets by the streamers. They went from basically 100% US commissioning to less than 50% over the last 5 or 6 years. And now, where there is growth, it's going back a bit to North America. Still, the majority of commissioning for them is outside North America, but that growth is really interesting. And that's just happened in the last 12 months or so, And you have to question whether it's the sort of Trump effect and the mood within that country for making America great again, and placating Donald Trump and his views on world trade and tariffs, of course. In terms of the areas within commissioning that we've seen a big downturn in, again, this is 25 versus previous year, so you can see more or less everything is very small. That means flat, not much change, except for three sectors. Comedy and documentary were down significantly last year, and crime to a degree as well. Now, crime is still the most important area of commissioning, so it's still the biggest, but it was down on the previous year. So this is where we're seeing drops. Now, interestingly, children, which you see there that is flat, that declined the year before and the year before that. So we saw a big tail off in children's content in 23 and 24. And if you add up those types of content, children's, comedy, documentary, is it coincidence that those are the sort of things that people now go to YouTube and social media for? So I'll leave you with that question. Are those genres disproportionately affected by what we're seeing with the growth of social as a television-like platform? Another interesting trend is around the scripted-unscripted mix. So again, 6, 7, 8 years ago, streaming was all about drama. High-end, high production value drama. During the pandemic, we saw the rise of unscripted as a significant area of commissioning for the streamers. And now we've rested on a steady state where basically for every scripted commission, they're making one unscripted. So we've reached parity in terms of the importance of that type of content. Which, of course, if you're in the scripted space, again, you feel it because we've seen that shift from much more scripted to parity between scripted and unscripted for those streamers. So all these little things are adding up to compound the impact on the drama market specifically and on the scripted market specifically. Sport. So this is another area where we've seen a big shift just in the last 2 years or so, specifically around what the streamers are doing. Again, we think back to 2020, so pandemic, when there was a sort of streaming boom globally, when we were all stuck indoors. Basically nothing was spent on sport by the streamers, and over the last 3 to 4 years, we've seen significant growth. Now, it's still small compared to what's spent on TV and film, but it's growing, and it's going to continue to grow as a significant investment for the streamers. At the moment, globally, the streamers spend 13% of their content budget on sport. That's 13% that's not going to film and TV. So again, all these little things are compounding the way that the industry feels if you're in that film and TV market. Where's the ceiling? Where are they going to stop? Well, if we look at public broadcasters, public and commercial, they spend about 30% of their content budgets on sport, and pay TV operators spend about 50%. So if streamers get to the levels of pay TV, and we think about Netflix, that's 9 to 10 billion budget a year to go on sport. So plenty of headroom for more spend that potentially takes money out of the market for film and TV. However, there's a silver lining to the cloud, and that is sport companion content. So this is not live sports rights, but it's things like Drive to Survive and documentaries, features, biopics about sports stars, etc., has been a strong growth area for streaming commissioning. So this has been a bright light in the otherwise slightly grey market for commissioning activity, and that's been rising significantly over the last 5 years. It's also benefited the finished program market, so licensing of sport, non-live sport content has also grown significantly just in the last 2 years. So lots of opportunity there around wrapping additional content around that live sports programming and keeping the audience who are interested in sport coming back to the platform repeatedly. And as you can see, if we look at the type of content that is getting commissioned for sport, it's documentary that was disproportionately benefited. So a large proportion, considerably more than half, was documentary companion content. As I say, Drive to Survive type content and biopics in particular. So what about the structure of the industry? Because as I said at the beginning, we're seeing a complete reinvention of the way we think about content production and distribution relationships to re-engineer for the new industry that we find ourselves in. What does it tell us about the new structure for Hollywood and the entertainment industry globally as a whole? So the first thing to say is that the single most important change that we've seen in the last 10 years is the emergence of the global opportunity. It's so easy to forget that 10 years ago there effectively were no global platforms. Everything was based on geographic licensing, distribution. Yes, there were some global TV channels, CNN, news channels, etc. But effectively no global entertainment platforms existed. Now the entire industry is re-engineering around that global opportunity. And if we think about the latest, greatest merger, which is, of course, Netflix potentially buying Warner Brothers, and we think about what's happening with YouTube and all the noise around YouTube, is it, isn't it, television, etc. What we're seeing is basically the industry re-engineering to position for that global audience and that global opportunity. But if we think about the way it's structuring, is it really so new? So for those who were here last year, I'm just going to remind you about a few things that I talked about and I presented last year here on this stage. The first was that the global entertainment industry now divides perfectly into two halves of value of $400 billion each. On the left, legacy platforms, the theatrical business, the transactional business, and broadcast and pay TV, all of which are shrinking. On the right, streaming and social video, online video, both of which are growing strongly. So we've got this world of two halves. Business models are converging onto one form of distribution, and that form of distribution, of course, is streaming. And that is driven by the pressure of the audience. So in evolutionary terms, when you subject something to pressure, it will adapt in a similar way. And the audience, of course, is all moving to streaming. That's why the business is all moving to streaming. And then I introduced the concept of what I call diagonal integration, which in summary was about legacy players needing to leverage growth in the non-legacy areas. So if you're in that shrinking side of the chart, you still need to grow, and the way to do it is to either try to copy the new players who are growing, form collaborations with them, or combine with them. And of course, in the last year, we've seen numerous examples of diagonal integration, be it TF1 in France doing a deal with Netflix, be it DAZN buying Foxtel in Australia, be it Channel 4 in the UK, putting video content onto Spotify. All of those are examples of the concept that I talked about in January last year. Now, in terms of that M&A, the consolidation part that we're seeing in the industry, I think the picture is now becoming quite clear. And it's been helped, of course, by Netflix, Warner Brothers, and the strategic rationale for that merger. Let's take our audience. So at the center, our global opportunity. On the outside, we have the studios and the big content owners. So thinking about the value chain, you start with production and you need to somehow get that produced content to the audience. So on our outer ring, big content production. Increasingly, those big content producers are aligned with that new form of distribution, which of course is streaming. So either their own players, or in the case of Netflix, it's going backwards to do a vertical content plus distribution M&A merger. Absolutely as old school as you can get, from the days of studios buying cable TV channels and cable distribution systems. This is the new way of thinking about vertical integration. But of course it's also diagonal. It's also legacy with new world. Decline with growth, to hopefully make a better whole. So if we think about that Warner-Netflix merger, it's about re-engineering for the global opportunity. And that merger is a vertical, content plus distribution, horizontal, content plus content, and diagonal, legacy with new, all at the same time. And then we have an increasingly emerging third-party distribution layer. So if we think about the owned and operated production, they're increasingly integrated with the owned and operated distribution layer. And social media video platforms are beginning to fulfill the third-party distribution. So they're not owned, they're not integrated with any of the players in our traditional business. But increasingly they're being turned to as a distribution opportunity. So that takes us to what next? If we accept that those are the layers of getting our content to the audience that is increasingly global, and you think to my nice diagram with the circles, we're left with some players who sit outside of that nice vertically integrated, getting to the global audience opportunity. Legacy broadcasters, of course, and pay TV operators. Studios that are not vertically integrated with the new form of global distribution. Of course, Sony, and to a lesser degree NBC, because they have US streaming and some joint venture internationally. They don't have a fully developed global streamer. And interestingly, and this is a thought for the future, of course, the third-party distribution layer, the social media. So in the old days, vertical integration, as I said, we saw in the 90s lots of interest in buying cable distribution, cable channels. Are we going to see in the future those non-owned and operated third-party distributors buying backwards into that vertical chain to get the content and to get the streaming opportunity as well for full-length, professional, high-grade content to take them to that next level? Again, I'll leave you with that thought. What about YouTube? So if you've spent any time at all on LinkedIn, on social media, you'll see how angry people get talking about YouTube and whether YouTube is television or not, and you're on one side or the other. You either go with the evangelists or you go with the what do we call them? The Luddites, the people who don't want to think about the change in the legacy business. But in all those conversations, there is one fundamental piece that is almost always not addressed and not talked about, and that is the money. And if you have to make content and fund content and scrabble together partners to get your show made, that's kind of the most important thing when we think about where we take the opportunity for distribution and partnership. So let's think about legacy players. Broadcasters around the world, it doesn't matter where you are, if you're in the UK, if you're in Sweden, wherever you are, you have the same challenge. Your audience is flat or declining, and 100% your young audience is disappearing. So your first option is to do absolutely nothing, and then you're going to have lower audience, declining advertising income, a fall in your revenue, your young audience has gone away, and you've got less money for content. And that's kind of the strategy that's been the most popular over the last 4 or 5 years. Your second option is to look for diagonal partnerships, so buying into or collaborating with that growth opportunity, turning to YouTube, Netflix, Amazon, to look for a form of partnership. And that could be distributing your content on the platform. It could be a full linear channel deal, as we've seen all of the broadcasters in France do with either Netflix or Amazon. Nominally then, that solves a lot of your problems. It gets you to that younger audience. It helps your audience stabilize or grow. That should help your ad revenue and stop the drop in money, which means your money for investing in content at least stays the same, if not grows. The problem, and this is what no one talks about, is that additional distribution is great and additive to revenue, but only up to the point that it becomes cannibalistic on owned and operated platforms. Because once that power balance shifts, you've lost everything. In a world, in an extreme where you're 100% dependent on YouTube and other social media for distribution, not saying that will happen, just an example. In that extreme, you have no power. You have no power to control your ad sales. You've got a third party controlling that in your place, and then you lose the pricing power and the ability to maintain revenue. And the problem is the CPM imbalance. So CPM, an advertising term, cost per thousand, is the cost of reaching 1,000 people with your advertisement. Basically, the average CPMs on YouTube are considerably lower than on broadcast television. But we've got this situation where broadcast TV and streaming has built a business model to support professional content. YouTube has built a model to support very cheap amateur content, and they work great. When the two meet, you've got this imbalance with the money, because you can't fund high-end content on YouTube average CPMs. So what does that mean when thinking about distribution? Well, it swings the balance in favor of relationships with platforms that have a broadcast-like CPM. So Netflix and others, they charge advertisers at least equal and sometimes more than a broadcaster would charge advertisers. So there you can maintain the value that then goes back into the content to make that high-end drama and movie content. So 3 options then if you're looking for a distribution partnership. One is don't put content on the platforms, on the social media platforms, but use it as a promotional platform for clips. And yes, we've seen a lot of that. Second option is to increase the volume of your advertising when you put content on those platforms to try to redress the balance. And the third option is to control and create a two-tier CPM, where basically you say the value of the content relates to the value of the advertising. There you have to maintain control of ad sales. The fourth option, which we don't really want to think about, is that YouTube CPMs come up to match broadcast, and then where does that leave the professional content industry? Because you're basically saying your cat video is worth as much as my high-end sci-fi 8-part drama, which, of course, is a massive problem for the future of content. Now, I'm going to have to speed up. I've got 4 minutes left. Microdrama. Microdramas are just the latest iteration of crossover content. We've seen numerous attempts to do this over time. Try and leverage what's happening in user-gen content, vertical video, short form, and professionalize it so you can grab some of that money. Microdramas are the latest iteration. Are they an opportunity? Certainly in Asia, yes. A large proportion of the population is engaging with microdramas, around 30% regularly. Much less so in Europe, closer to 10%. So 10% are regularly watching microdrama in Europe. And then there are pockets of opportunity like Brazil and Turkey, where, of course, the type of content that microdrama is, soapy-like telenovela content, is very popular. So yes, it's an opportunity, but perhaps over-egged in some of the markets outside Asia. As you'd expect, people who like microdrama love romance, they love horror, sci-fi, and interestingly, sport skews quite high for microdrama viewers. Understand that they are super consumers. So this is the profile we used to see for early adopters of streaming. They actually watch a lot more TV than the average person, 37 minutes more per day. And they're already thinking about social media platforms as a source of drama content. So when you ask them how they use social media, it's less about influencers and cat videos, and they're already thinking about it for scripted drama. And finally, I'm going to leave you with a thought about AI, just to throw the cat among the pigeons. So, is AI boom or bust for the creator economy? And is the real and imminent threat from AI not to professional content, where it's a great potential tool, but to the creator economy itself? This is a new cooking influencer, short Instagram video, making...
Look how glossy this batter is. It tastes even better than it looks.
Right, so that's my influencer video. I'm an idiot and I don't know how to use AI, and I made that in 30 seconds with a 2-sentence text prompt in Gemini, which is not even a specialist LLM for video, although it uses Veo. So what happens to the creator economy when I, an idiot, can create 50 influencers a day doing cooking, doing travel shows, as a single entity? Maybe even a company can create hundreds a week of influencer people and armies across multiple genres. Do viewers begin to see influencers for what they are, conduits for marketing, and actually begin to shift back to real human-produced premium content? So, with that thought, I'll leave you. There's the QR code for anyone who does want the slides. And I don't know if we've got time for questions. There's 30 seconds left on the clock. Thank you.
You have questions. We have full 7 minutes. Thank you so much, Guy Bisson. Please. Yes, no, that was perfect. I do have questions. I think the thing that's kind of really struck me are the sort of long-term curves and this new normal that we've settled on. And what I was thinking about is, if we hadn't had the peak TV hump, then how would we tell the story of the current situation? So this 75% of the peak, how does that compare to 5 years, 10 years ago?
Yeah, so it's, if you go back that far in time, yes, it's higher than we were back then, but it's all the little things that I was talking about there that maybe if you're sitting in the scripted, in the drama space, you're feeling the pain a bit more. So it's that shift to reality TV and light entertainment by the streamers. It's the move into sport, all of which is taking money away. So while the gross number of commissions, even at 75%, is higher than it was before we went into this incredible growth, all of those other things are impacting scripted content in particular. So that's why people are feeling it, perhaps, even though we're still in nominally a better place.
But I mean, I nominally, but I mean, I feel like we are in a better place. Also, our industries have professionalized, and we are able to operate. Our local production market industries are also able to operate in a global market, and that's also like we are feeling this crunch because we didn't have that expectation.
Yeah, I think that's true. So the industry obviously had to scale for that opportunity. And so any reduction is against that rescaling to take that opportunity. And so again, it feels painful because now it's shrunk again.
Would you dare to sort of guess at what's going to happen next and how we should think about this? Are we actually settling on this level?
I think so. I think you don't see many trends in this industry that stay pretty stable for almost 3 years. And I think this is the new steady state. It's really, I thought the 50-50 scripted, unscripted on streaming commissioning was really interesting. I think we've reached the steady state in commissioning. It's a level that they can sustain and still make a profit, mixing in lower value content that's still good for audience retention as well. So they found the formula that now they're at audience scale is working in terms of making enough money.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this balance between the original commissioning and the licensing, which you did mention is returning. And then, of course, you've also talked about these sort of diagonal opportunities of sort of legacy assets, as you said, with new types of sort of growth monetization. And I wondered, does that mean, are you saying that the value of the catalogs is changing again and rising again?
It very much depends on what the catalogue is. So I think, again, referencing the Warner Netflix deal, clearly there the opportunity is intellectual property. So the vast amount of IP within that library, which allows the buyer, if it's Netflix, to develop all sorts of offshoot programming that already has a fan base out there that is a global fan base. That elevates the value above just a catalogue. So it's about the nuances around what that catalogue is and what it represents, where the value lies.
Some of it might also be about what we're willing to do with it, because of course, if we are I mean, the microdrama trend in itself seems to be an indication that these sort of vertical formats or the new vertical formats are taking. There's an opportunity from the audience's perspective and an openness to vertical storytelling. And I don't know how to say this because, of course, this is a terrible, like from a rights perspective, from an artistic perspective, this seems like a terrible thing even to suggest. But AI editing and the possibility of easily generating sort of like missing little bits does seem to me like we're approaching a point where we could use, where we can make vertical content from some of our catalogs if we could work out the rights. And that could possibly present some opportunities. There are sort of formats that we don't know yet that might exist in 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, it's an opportunity. It's not, I don't think it's the future of television or is ever going to be a massive part of the industry, but it's a new and interesting opportunity for some.
and possibly to vitalize existing IP and do these kinds of things. All right. You did mention about microdrama viewers that they don't seem to be currently replacing streaming. So what are they, or traditional viewing, what are they actually cannibalizing then? Is it the doom scroll that is being replaced by microdrama?
It's a good question, and I don't have hard data to say what they're substituting. Clearly, as we saw from the last slide in that section, they are using social media specifically for drama, much more so than the average social media user. So at 37 minutes extra that's a decent amount of microdrama if it all goes to microdrama. So it's not necessarily cannibalistic. They're super consumers, and as I say, we see this again and again with the early adopters, that they actually consume more, not less, television.
It does open some really interesting questions about what the production pipelines are going to be, and especially, of course, this potential for comedy in that space, very fast working, sort of almost improv-based comedy writing, you could see a potential for that. Yeah. We'll have to see how this develops. Thank you so much, Guy Bisson.
Thank you.
Thank you.